Hey guys, welcome back to Learn Python the Hard Way. Today we're going to focus on exercise 20 and learn about functions and files and how we can use them together. As always, you're going to find the link to the current chapter in the description below. Since this is part of the paid section of the book, you would actually have to buy the book, or alternatively, of course, feel free to just follow along. Alright, and to get started, we have another exercise file that we're going to take a look at. So let's get started by creating a new Python file and then type out the exercise script here. And to do that, we can open a terminal window and navigate to the correct directory. And from here, we can open or create a new Python file. I'm using Visual Studio Code. So to do that, I'm going to type out code space and then the name of the file that we want to create. So exercise20.py for Python. This is going to open a new empty file, and the first thing we're going to do is to import argv from the sys module, which allows us to work with command line arguments that we can pass to the program when we execute it. And when we actually provide those command line arguments, we're going to store them in two separate variables. The script variable, which again will hold the name of our script as we saw in the previous exercises, the previous videos, and then the input file, which is a second command line argument that we provide, which is going to be held here in this variable. Now, first of all, let's start out by defining a new function, print all. And we're going to pass it an argument called f. And we are then going to actually read that argument that we're going to pass to it. So we can use it to read a file, for example. Next, we're going to add a second function called rewind, which also takes an argument f. And here we're going to call seek on it. And we're going to pass it a 0 as an input to work with it. And after that, we define a third function called print_line, which takes the line count and again f, short for file. And then we're going to print out the line count here and call readLine on the file that we pass to it. Now after that, we can define the current file, and we're actually going to open the input file that again we passed here in the beginning as a command line argument. We're going to open that and this opened file object is then going to be stored in the current file variable. Let's print out. First, let's print the whole file. And again, we're going to add \n to add a new line here. And now we can call print all, the function we defined up here, and we're gonna pass to it the current file. So the file that we just opened here. And after that we print. Now let's rewind, kind of like a tape. And now we're gonna call rewind, the function we defined up here. And we pass to it again the current file. And after that again, we're gonna print out, let's print 3 lines. We're gonna define a variable current line and set it equal to 1. Then call print_line. And here we're going to pass in the current line, which we defined up here, and also the current file. And after that, we basically update current line and we assign it, or we increment it. So we set current line to current line plus 1. And then we're going to call print_line again, pass to it current line, which now we have updated from 1 to 2 because we increased it by 1. And of course we again are going to pass to it the current file. And now again, we basically repeat the same step. So we're going to increase current line by 1, and we call print align, and basically pass the very same arguments again, so current line and current file. All right, so let's save that real quick. And if we head over to our terminal now, we can execute that file that we just wrote. So let's type out Python 3 or Python 3.6, followed by exercise 20.py, the name of the Python file, and then followed by a text file, which is basically the file that we want to take a look at. So what we get here is, first let's print the whole file. This is a test file, so that's the content of the file that we created before. And now it says, now let's rewind, kind of like a tape. Let's print this reline. And to make this a little bit clearer, actually, let's just briefly create a new file. And let's just pass in this is line 1, this is line 2, this is line 3. All right, so we have that saved. And now we can go back and basically run the same command again as before. And now we get pretty much the same output. So here, as in the example solution here. So first let's print the whole file. This is line 1, line 2, line 3. Now let's rewind, kind of like a tape. Let's print 3 lines. And then we have 1, this is line 1, 2, this is line 2, 3, this is line 3. And after each one of them, there's basically a new line in here. And that happens because what we have in front here is a line count here, 1, 2, and 3. And that's pretty much the current line that we pass to it here, that we defined and set to 1 initially, and which we then increased or incremented by 1. And so that's going to update that. And then, of course, in general, we call the print align function here. And we, again, pass the line count and then the file itself. And here we print the line count, so the number 1, 2, or 3, respectively, followed by read line. So that prints out the separate lines that we specified before. So that's the exercise itself. Let's now take a look at the study drill section. So the first study drill here is to write an English comment for each line to understand what it does. So let's start at the beginning of the file. And the very first line here is to basically import argv from the sys library. Or sys module. And what that does is allows us to basically work with command line arguments, which is what we do here in the second line. When we actually take argv, which we provide when we run the command here. So if you just take a look at it again, here we type out Python 3.6 and then we provide the name of the file, of course, and then after that a second command line argument, so test.txt, which would be the second command line argument and then correspond to input file. And of course, script here would be equal to exercise 20.py, so the name of the file itself. So that means here what we do is we assign command line arguments to variables in order to be able to use them later on. After that, we define a print all function, which prints basically the content of the file that we provide. After that, we have the rewind function. So that pretty much rewinds our file to the original position. And then we have print align, which, as we saw before down here, we print out a line number, followed by a line of the file. After that, we open our file and assign it to a variable, current file. We have a print statement here, and then we call print all. So we print out the content of the entire file. We rewind the file to the first position. We print another line, and then basically what we do here in the 6 lines here at the bottom is we set current line, and then we print the line using the function we defined before. So we print out each line of the file with the line number. And the same thing basically happens down here. The only thing we change is that we increment the current line. So we should just add that as an additional comment. So we increase the current line number by 1. And the same down here. So these are the different steps we take, and we added that as a comment in here. So the second study drill is to, each time the print a line function is run, that we are passing in a variable current line, which we defined here. Write out what current line is equal to in each function call and trace how it becomes line count and print a line. Alright, so initially we define it as 1, and then we call print a line and we pass current line to it. So we pass in the value 1, and we also pass in the current file, which again is the entire file itself, which we opened here. Now if we take a look at that, here when we call print a line, the current line here is passed in as the first argument. So it basically becomes line count here, which is then printed out as the first statement. And then the second argument that we add, that we provide here when we call the function, is the current file. So that's the file itself, which is then assigned to f, and we calling read line on it to read the line of the file. So that's the first statement here. So current line has a value of 1. What we do here, the next line, is that we increase current line by 1. So here current line would be 2, and we follow the same steps. So we call print a line, we pass current line to it, which is 2 in this case, which again is assigned, if you take a look at that, which is assigned here to line count. So line count is now 2, because it's basically the content of a current line that we pass to it. And then as a second argument, we provide the current file, which here is corresponding to f. So line count is now 2, and then we call f read line again, which reads out the second line of the file. So we're going through the file line by line. And then finally, we again define current line again, and here we assign current line to it, which now is 2, and we add 1 to it, so current line is now 3 in total. And we call print a line one final time. We pass current line, which is now 3 to it, which again corresponds to line count. We also pass current file to it, which corresponds to f, and we print that out here. So line count is now 3, and we read the next line. And that's basically how we execute the different statements, and how we use current line, and how we increase it or by 1, or how we increment it to actually print it out. So the next study drill is to find each place a function is used and check its definition to make sure that you are giving it the right arguments. Alright, so if we take a look at this again, we have a total of 3 different functions that we defined ourselves: print all, rewind, and print a line. And if we go through our file here, you see the first time we use one of our own functions is here when we call print all current file. So current file is again corresponds to the file that we opened, and here we have a parameter called f. That is our file basically that we pass to it, and then we call print on f.read. So we read the entire file and we print out the content of it. Next, if we take a look, after that we use rewind, and here we pass the current file to it. So the current file here corresponds to f again, and we call seek on that and provided a value of 0, which basically resets it to the initial, to the zeros position of the file. And that allows us then to later on again start from the top of the file and go through it and print out each line of the file. And we use println, which we just took a closer look at before. So again, current line that we provide here corresponds to line count, current file corresponds to f, and when we call print and we pass it line count and f.readLine, it's printing out the line count followed by the current line that we are reading of our file. So the fourth study drill question here is to research online what the seek function for files does. Try pydoc file and see if you can figure it out from there. Then try pydoc file.seek to see what seek does. Alright, so if we open our terminal again, we can type in pydoc followed by file and press enter. And here we now see the documentation of file. So a class file, open a file. So that's the general approach how we would open a new file. We can open it in read mode, write mode, or append mode. And then the file will be created. If it doesn't exist when open for writing or appending, we truncate it for opening for writing, and so on and so forth. And of course, we can scroll down here and take a look at the different functions that are available, including closing the file. If we close out of this again and now open pydoc file.seek, we can see here that the seek function doesn't return anything. It moves to a new file position. So it's the argument offset is a byte count. Optional arguments whence defaults to 0. Offset from start of the file. Offset should be greater or equal to 0. Alright, so that basically explains what f.seek 0 does. So when we provide an argument of 0 to the seek function, which we call on a file, then that means we offset the file from the start of the file from the very beginning. And so when we called print all here initially, at this point we printed out the entire file, and to make sure that afterwards when we printed out each line that we actually started from the beginning of the file again, we called rewind, which again used the seek function here with the argument of 0. So this way we make sure that we start at the very beginning, and that's basically how that works and how we can work with it. Alright, and finally we have this study drill here, research the shorthand notation plus equals and rewrite the script to use plus equals instead. And of course we could just Google for that, for Python plus equals for instance, and we can just take a look at what comes up here. So here, for example, if you take at the very first link, we find here the Python reference handbook, and if we use plus equals, we can basically, if we scroll down a little bit, we can see an example here. So if we have a variable a and we set it to 10, and then we write a plus equals 5, we basically add a value of 5 to 10, so it's a total of 15. So it's a shorthand notation, which we also see here. It's equivalent to a equals a plus b. So if we have a, so that's the same as a plus equals b. So instead of writing, in our case, for example, current line equals current line plus 1, which increases current line by 1, we can instead say, if we take, because it would be the same format as this here, where a would correspond to current line, because current line equals current line, and then 1 would correspond to b. Instead what we can do is we can write a, so current line, plus equals b, so current line plus equals 1. So let's adjust that real quick. And what that does basically is it takes current line and increases it by one. So that means instead of writing current line equals current line plus 1, we can write current line plus equals 1. So current line is equal to current line plus 1, and that's the shorthand notation. And of course we can do the same down here. So we can write current line plus equals 1 to increment that by 1. And just to make sure that it works correctly, let's head back to our file here. Or excuse me, back to the terminal, and let's run that command again. And it works just the same way as before. We still increment, here's a line number by 1, so it's properly displayed. Alright, so that's the study tools section, and finally let's take a look at some common student questions. So the first one is, what is f in the print all and other functions? So for example here, print all, and we pass it f. The f is a variable just like you had in other functions in exercise 18, except this time it's a file. A file at Python is kind of like an old tape drive on a mainframe or maybe a DVD player. It has a read head, and you can seek this read head around the file positions, then work with it there. Each time you do f.seek 0, you're moving to the start of the file. That's what we looked up just before in the documentation. Each time you do f.readLine, you're reading a line from the file and moving the read head to right after the \n that ends that line. This will be explained more as you go on. Right, so f basically refers to the file itself that we're working on. Next, why does seek 0 not set the current line to 0? So we're referring here to f.seek 0. Why does that not set current line here to 0? First, the seek function is dealing in bytes, not lines. The code seek 0 moves the file to the 0 byte, first byte in the file. Second, current line is just a variable and has no real connection to the file at all. We are manually incrementing it. So current line here, that is basically independent of seek, so it's a variable we defined before and that we just pass to print a line here. What is plus equal? You know how in English you can write it is as it's, or you can rewrite you are as you're. In English this is called a contraction, and this is kind of like a contraction for the two operations equal and plus. That means that x equals x plus y is the same as x plus equals y. This is what we just saw here with current line plus equals 1. How does readLine know where each line is? Inside of readLine is code that scans each byte of the file until it finds a \n character. So when we call readLine here on the file, it reads in the file where there's a new line. And if we just take another look at our text file again, we have each of those statements here on a new line. So that's how it knows that this is the first line, this is the second line, this is the third line, and readLine automatically knows where the line of each of those files is. The file f is responsible for maintaining the current position in the file after each readLine call, so that it will keep reading each line. Right. And then finally, why are there empty lines between the lines in the file? The readLine function returns the \n that's in the file at the end of that line. Add a end equals quotation mark at the end of your print function calls to avoid the to add a double \n to every line. Right, so if we add end equals quotation mark, then we can basically adjust what the print statement, how it ends. By default it ends in a new line, but if we pass end equals quotation mark or anything else in there, then this would be the new separator, so we can replace the \n with something else. Alright, and that's the final question here, and that was exercise 20 of Learn Python the Hard Way. And see you guys next time in the next video with exercise 21.